Everybody, welcome. My name is Garrett Schmidt, and I'm the CEO and Managing Editor of VBC Exhibit Hall. And I'd like to welcome you all to today's live webinar hosted by Lightbeam with special guest Wakely. And this one's called Driving Shared Savings Through Regional Efficiency. And we've got a lot of information to cover today and a great discussion to share with you. A few items of note before we get started. Everyone has joined today in listen-only mode, so you don't need to worry about turning off your mic or your camera. We can't see you or hear you, but we do want to hear from you, and we're going to have a time for some Q&A towards the end of the presentation today. So at any time during the presentation, go ahead and drop your question in using you have a control module and a place for questions specifically. So put them in there at any point. If we don't get to yours, if we have a big audience today, again, don't worry, someone will reach out to you via email to make sure that we get your question answered. So even if we're closing out right at the last second there, go ahead and drop your question in and someone will get to you. We're also going to have some polling questions today, so you can play along at home. So we'll get to those as well, and they are, and I'll remind you of this later, but they are anonymous. So this is just for fun, but we'll get a chance to kind of see who else is in the audience and see how you are stacked among your colleagues. So without further ado, one last thing is the session today is being recorded. And so when we conclude, maybe about an hour or so afterwards, you will receive an email. And that email will have a link to today's recording as well as to a place where you can download the slides. So without further ado, let me introduce our speakers today. With us, we have Mr. Pete Arsenault, and he is a senior consultant with Wakely. Also with us is we have Megan Chaffey, and she is an associate actuary with Wakely as well. And then we have Mr. Patrick Burton. He is the SVP of Business Development with Lightbeam Health. So I believe, Patrick, you're going to get us kicked off, so I'll turn it over to you at this time. Welcome.
Awesome. Thank you, Garrett. Thanks, everybody, for joining today. Patrick Burton, SVP Business Development, worked with our friends at Wakely to create the partnership that we just launched here a few weeks ago. I'll be walking you through a bit of an agenda, some housekeeping items before we get into the heart of the content. Really what we want to do is enable and empower you to better understand how benchmarks, network optimization, and ACO optimization can really drive advanced performance and success as the world changes, benchmarks compress, and things become a little more difficult as time goes on. So we'll kick things off. I'll pass the ball in a moment over to Megan to talk about the concept of regional efficiency, the importance of understanding the benchmark math, as well as how efficiency can drive performance. We'll toss the ball over to Pete to cover some network optimization concepts. I'll then hop in with a cameo about how Lightbeam works within the performance year with MSSP ACOs to help optimize performance. And then we'll wrap things up with a brief review of several case studies highlighting successful outcomes of clients. Without any further ado, I'll pass the ball over to Megan to talk about regional efficiency.
Thanks, Patrick. So first, we're going to talk through MSSP benchmarking and regional efficiency and why it's important. So first, let's start with how the benchmark is created. So let's say you have an agreement start of 2026 in MSSP. You'll have 3 benchmark years, 2023, 2024, and 2025. And those will be your benchmark years 1 through 3. Your benchmark years 1 and 2 will be trended to the benchmark year 3 basis and also be risk adjusted. So they'll all be comparable to one another. And then it will blend these together to create the final historical benchmark. And benchmark year 3 is the most meaningful because it reflects your most current performance. If that blended benchmark ends up higher than your benchmark year 3, you will get a natural tailwind heading into the performance year, and if it's lower, you'll end up starting with a headwind. CMS uses 3 years to smooth volatility, so if your benchmark year 3 is worse than the blended value, they're essentially saying that your most recent performance is worse than your long-term average. And so that creates a headwind because your benchmark won't fully reflect that downturn. So having a higher benchmark year 3 risk score can help increase your likelihood of having a tailwind. Specifically for renewals, your benchmark year 3 risk score is going to be driven by diagnoses coded 2 years prior to the new agreement start. So accurate and complete documentation can help improve the benchmark year 3 risk score and lead to starting efficiency. So now that we kind of know where the historical benchmark comes from, we can talk more about the adjustments that get added to the benchmark, as there's even more opportunity there. So once that benchmark gets set, the ACO will get the grader of 3 different calculations. First is the regional efficiency. So if your risk-adjusted spending is lower than the region, CMS will give you 35 to 50% of that gap added to your benchmark. Or if your ACO had savings in prior agreement periods, CMS will give you half of that savings. And finally, the health equity benchmark adjustment. If your ACO has 15% or more dual or LIS membership, that ACO is eligible for HEBA. And that is for new agreement periods starting in 2025 and on. But of these 3 adjustments, regional efficiency is usually the winner for ACOs, just because prior savings only applies when the ACO has generated historical savings, and many groups do not have sustained multi-year strong performance for this to outweigh the regional efficiency. And then for HEBA, that does require having that 15% dual or LIS membership, and many ACOs don't meet that threshold, or that adjustment is less than regional efficiency. So in the example on this slide, the ACO gets a combined 1.9% tailwind. They have 0.9% from the benchmark year 3 gap, and then another 1% from regional efficiency. So before the performance year even starts, they're already ahead. So we've discussed what helps lift the benchmark, but on the next slide, we can show how that impacts gross savings. So the starting efficiency is largely predictive of a group's final savings. We did a study across 2024 ACOs, and about 40% of that gross savings can be explained just by where they start relative to the region and that benchmark year 3 versus historical benchmark amount. The other 60% is based on clinical and operational components. But if you start efficient, your likelihood of generating savings is dramatically higher before you even run your operations. We've seen ACOs that weren't necessarily the best clinically, but because they were regionally efficient, often due to smart network curation, they generated higher savings. On the flip side, groups with great care management sometimes underperform simply because they start some percentage above their region and spend the whole year trying to climb out of that hole. So if you own the MSSP, you have a bit more direct control over that starting efficiency because you're able to decide who's in and who's out of your group. But if you're participating in an ACO, this is still important because you want to know, are you driving that starting efficiency? And if so, are you receiving that shared savings credit downstream? So whether you own an MSSP or you're participating, understanding the starting efficiency is very important. So on the next slide, we'll talk through about how we move from a historical benchmark to the performance year period. So this accounts for 2 things. First is trend, and the second is risk adjustment. So the first with trend is that if you're a group with a small share of the county, your benchmark will be more influenced by regional trend, and then ACOs with a larger share of the county are more weighted on national trend, and these 2 can be materially different. So it's important to know how much of the county your group makes up to know what trends will be more impactful. In addition to national and regional trend, for groups that are starting on or after 2024, ACPT is also included in these calculations. ACPT is a fixed trend based on USPCC that is set at the beginning of the agreement period. And typically this ends up being a headwind for ACOs because these do get locked down at the start of the agreement period and they're oftentimes lower than the national and regional trend. So they will lower your estimated benchmark in the performance year. You can see in this chart here, we had above a 7% trend for the national and region, and ACPT came in closer to 5%. So that ended up being lowered once ACPT was blended in. And with the environment of increased expenditure trend, this is becoming even more of a headwind for groups as national and regional trends end up higher, ACPT is lower. It's just another thing that groups have to consider going into the performance year. And then additionally, the benchmark is risk adjusted from benchmark year 3 to the performance year. And on the next slide, we'll talk through why this all kind of comes together, the financial impact. So this waterfall shows just how powerful regional efficiency is. These two scenarios show the same exact expenditure levels, but when we apply regional efficiency, the ACO generates savings, and without it, they show a loss. So this is why regional efficiency is such an important lever, because it can flip a result from negative to positive. With many groups navigating headwinds such as ACPT, regional efficiency is often one of the most important levers that an ACO can have to boost their benchmark. And this slide kind of tells us that there are some instances where you can't really operationalize your way out of a weak regional position. You could run a great care management program and still lose money if your benchmark is weaker. And this is just why network optimization is so important for groups. So I'll pass it over to Pete to speak more on that.
Perfect, thank you, Megan. I think we're starting this next section with a poll to get some engagement from the audience. You should be seeing that pop up. Yeah, go ahead, Garrett.
Yeah, so you will see this on your screen now. And the first question is this. How would you describe your ACO's approach to network optimization as you enter each performance year? And is it data-driven, comprehensive review? Do you conduct full evaluations? Or is it light touch adjustments, limited target network decisions? Or is it minimal changes year to year? No real network changes to speak of that are typically made. So again, how would you describe your ACO's approach to network optimization? And if you're joining us a little later, these are, we can have a couple of these. They are anonymous, so feel free to participate. And we're going to share the results with you so you can kind of see how you stack among some of the your other ACO partners. And I know there's a number of you who may not be part of ACOs that are joining us today, so that's okay. We'll have another question for you here shortly. So I think most of the results have come in at this point, so we're going to close it down probably in another 5 long seconds here, and then give you guys a chance to talk about the results. All right, I'm going to shut it down in 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. All right, and are you guys able to see the results on the screen? And if so, if you wouldn't mind reading out the percentages, that way if folks are calling in or can't see the screen, they can participate.
Yeah, perfect. So it looks like we have 51% of the audience doing full evaluations every year, 34% with a light touch targeted approach, and 14% with minimal to no change year over year. So it looks like we got a good distribution of different approaches and methodologies to network optimization, and that just helps us understand who we're speaking to and tailor some of the next section's comments to apply. So if we move to the next slide, we can talk a little bit about network optimization and how we see the world. I want to start with a slide that illustrates the importance of underwriting. So this slide is showing 2023 and 2024 MSSP results, ACOs who are in both years, and looking at savings rate change year over year by the population change. So essentially drawing a correlation between ACOs who are changing their population year over year, in other words, looking at network mix, provider mix, making changes. And what you see is providers who are either removing or adding participants year over year are correlated with higher savings in the program. So just validating that taking a look at your network year over year and making changes does seem to be driving that increased savings that we like to see. If we go to the next slide, I want to talk a little bit about the different approaches, and apologies for the small print here on this, but I wanted to get 2 different methodologies on the same slide to sort of display some of the pitfalls that we see in TIN level results. So the top of this slide is building TIN level results from an ACO, and this is top and bottom are the same ACO, but on the top we have TIN level results built through what I'll call a scaled ACO approach or a top-down approach. So that involves taking an ACO benchmark and then scaling it to the practices in that ACO, typically by the distribution of risk score relative to the ACO or risk score plus expenditure relative to the ACO. We've seen this methodology. We've certainly has value, I think a lot of collaborative ACOs even might pay out to certain providers based on this methodology. But it's important when you're looking at results that are built this way that you understand this isn't necessarily how each of these TINs is going to contribute to the ACO. In other words, it's not necessarily consistent with what an ACO brings, or what a practice brings to the ACO, right? If I take this practice out, is the ACO better off or worse? So if you look at practice 6 in the top methodology, you may conclude this is an underperformer, right? About 1.8% loss. It's a relatively large practice, so it's driving about $3.4 million in losses year to date. If you build this truly bottoms up, so basically building each TIN's benchmark with their own historical expenditures, their own risk scores, their own specific regions, more consistent with how a TIN would contribute to this ACO, it's a very different story for this practice. So if you look at the bottom chart, you see there are about 1.1% savings, which brings about $2.2 million in contribution to that ACO. So I wanted to show this to illustrate the different methodologies that can be used for practice level results. And when you're looking at network optimization year over year, and you're in spring and summer and looking at which practices are a good fit for the network, it's really important to spend the extra time to interrogate the assumptions and the logic going into those practice level results, so you can make a confident decision that you are showing results consistent with an ACO contribution methodology. Now, if we move to the next slide, that was one data point, right? It's a savings projection. You may build those off of one spend year, or maybe 2 spend years you look at to see how a certain TIN would project in an ACO track. We also like to look at historical trends, right? What did I just underwrite? So if you look at regional efficiency trends for the past 5 or 6 years, I highlighted a few things here. So practice 1, if you see, and again, apologies for the small print here, but what's happening is that practice from 2021 to 2023 was regionally inefficient, about 15 to 20% above the region in terms of risk-adjusted costs. In 2024, that practice improved dramatically to about 86%. Now, this is a small practice. It's about 120 lives, so that's not abnormal. You see swings like that in practice sizes of that nature, but that is something where you want to dig in, right? If you've underwritten this practice to say, yeah, it looks good off of 2024 spend, we're going to keep them in the network. Well, did you just underwrite an anomaly spend year? Or did something happen with that practice that made it a sustainable change? Did the provider mix change underneath the TIN? Was there an operational improvement that was driving that result? Interrogating these historical trends, you can sort of start asking those questions, and obviously working with the partner practice to understand what happened, what changed in your practice to make this a sustainable change moving forward. If you look at practice 5, you'll see there's a pattern of underperformance. So if you're saying this is an underperformer, we might need to look at this for our network optimization decisions year over year. It gives you more confidence that that's a consistent underperformer that really hasn't shown measurable improvement year over year. And then practice 4 and 6 I highlighted because it does look like those practices are showing sustained improvement as you go through the years. And remember, practice 6 was that practice that we showed on the previous slide. This will increase the level of confidence that maybe they're signed up for the approach of the ACO. They're moving from regional inefficiency slowly and steadily towards being efficient practice. So interrogating these historical trends can really increase your level of confidence in the decisions you're making for the network year over year. If you go to the next slide, I want to illustrate, I mentioned variance can happen, especially at small practice sizes. This was a study that was done on ACO sizes and the variance of spend that can occur at different confidence intervals. So 1,000 simulations were run on each of these ACO sizes to get the bookends of where spend can go just by normal fluctuation of healthcare spend. And if you look at a 5,000 life ACO at a 68% confidence interval, it's about plus or minus 3% on either side of the mean. So when you're underwriting a group at 500 lives, 1,000 lives, it's important to keep in mind these natural fluctuations that do occur in the world we live in, to understand the true bookends of performance. Have I just underwritten an anomaly spend year where it's going to move back to the mean? In both directions, by the way. It's really important to interrogate that, especially for the budgeting processes that you go through, to understand where is my risk, right? Where are the true bookends of the performance for each practice that I've underwritten, and also aggregating that up to an ACO or portfolio level to look at the risk inherent in that ACO. If you move to the next slide, last thing I want to mention here is on scenario testing. So we get asked a lot, when should I rebase? Am I in the right track? Am I using the right assignment methodology? Things of that nature. I think it can be really critical to continue to interrogate your ACO to simulate different scenarios, different tracks, different agreement start periods, different assignment methodologies, MSRs, MLRs, to understand where are my biggest tailwinds, right? The regional efficiency tailwinds that might be built in. Is it time to rebase? Did I have inefficient years more recently that might produce a tailwind within the ACO? So having a partner that can help you understand where those scenarios land can be really helpful to understanding how to optimize the network year over year. So I'll kick it back to Patrick now to talk a little bit about the Lightbeam partnership.
Awesome, thank you, Pete. And I'll ask Garrett to interject with our second and final poll question of the webinar.
All right, are you ready? Here it comes. Okay, you all see this on your screen. The next polling question is, how integrated are your benchmarking forecasting capabilities with your MSSP operations management platforms? And again, this is anonymous if you're joining us later here. This is just kind of just for fun, but please participate and we'll show the results here so you can kind of see where you stack it. Are you fully integrated? Are you somewhat integrated? Is it barely integrated? Or is it totally separate? So we'll give folks a minute to respond here, and then we will share the results. Again, how integrated are your benchmarking or forecasting capabilities with your MSSP operations? And again, we realize that there are some folks out there that are not part of an ACO that are joining us today, which is totally fine. But this is for the ACO folks. So, all right, I think most people have responded at this point. So again, we'll give it another 5 seconds here to close out, and then I'll, like before, I'll have you guys read the results out. So here we go. Close it down in 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. Here we go. All right, Patrick, are you able to see this on your screen?
I sure can. Looks like a good mix. Not sure I could have predicted anything these days, to be honest with you, but it looks like there's a fair amount of integration out there, although there are a few folks that look like they have an opportunity to maybe better bring those two kind of distinct capabilities together in a more unified manner. Awesome. Well, thank you, Pete. Thank you, Garrett. Really wanted to dive in and talk a little bit about the partnership that Lightbeam and our friends at Wakely have forged over the past several weeks and months. Lightbeam, as an isolated organization, has been a leader in the population health management space for over 12 years, helping dozens of provider and payer organizations advance their participation in successful outcomes in ACOs and other value-based arrangements. But we saw a tremendous opportunity to grow our platform and our portfolio of capabilities through the combination of actuarial tooling and expertise with our operational enablement solutions. So really at the outset of our partnership, we set several goals. One, offer that unified experience to our clients so that they can look at benchmarking, actuarial forecasting, underwriting, all of the wonderful things that Megan and Pete shared in the first couple sections of this webinar, and our industry-leading population health management capabilities right in line with each other. We also wanted to make sure that our organization's capabilities were not limited simply to technology-only solutions. We want to make sure that we wrap around services to really help guide our clients and work with our clients hand in glove to make sure that they receive an excellent experience and really position themselves in the best possible manner to achieve optimal outcomes. And then I know it's a little business buzzwordy, but really truly deliver that 1 + 1 = 3 synergy in a manner that eliminates duplicate processes, duplicate costs, really in a manner that can bring it to the forefront without quote unquote breaking the bank. So when we look at our combined capabilities from an end-to-end kind of zoomed out process perspective, really we view this as kind of 3 main tranches, if you will, of activities. Certainly, and first and foremost, the growth phase of your determinations, where you're able to look at your historic performance versus historic benchmark in a manner that helps you understand maybe where those gaps are, where those opportunities are to improve. And then secondarily, be able to configure any number of kind of what if permutations of network scenarios as far as your changes year over year to the makeup of your participating practices and providers. Once you configure those kind of what if scenarios, we would then move really into kind of the CFO suite to understand from a financial perspective what that forecasted performance looks like across all of the different variable network scenarios that you've configured, and ultimately achieving or obtaining rather kind of actuarial certification from our friends at Wakely to give you the confidence that you need to make those decisions leading into that next performance year. Once the clock starts on that performance year, we also want to enable you with capabilities and services that help you best manage your MSSP throughout that performance year, so you can identify opportunities to improve, identify programs that can help drive care to your attributed membership and ultimately drive those favorable outcomes. For those who may not be familiar with Lightbeam, again, we've been in the business for nearly 13 years now. And really what we do is we help our clients analyze their data, which includes payer claims data, clinical data from EMRs, HIEs, and other sources, as well as social determinants data to really understand where there are opportunities to improve, and then delivering via platform automation and wraparound value-add services, really actionable insights to the stakeholders that are ultimately going to perform the activities to drive change into the organization, whether that's quality improvement, risk adjustment, accuracy, cost and utilization avoidance, understanding referral patterns, and several other use cases. Our clients tend to do very well. Just this past year for Performance 2024, the average Lightbeam MSSP client generated just under $16.5 million in savings, contributing to a total of just over $440 million in savings for Performance Year 24, bubbling up to just over $4.25 billion in total savings since Lightbeam has been supporting the MSSP program clients. So to give you a sense of how we work with our clients, I'll touch upon a few highlights that we think cause us to stand out and help drive this increased performance. First and foremost, we really take a technology plus enablement services approach to not just analyze the data and identify those opportunities to improve, but really to work with you to help you understand what actions and activities can be taken to drive better outcomes, again, whether they're quality, risk, cost, utilization, or network based. And then as we help you deploy workflows and programs, we can actually track those programs over time, so we can understand if we are going to devote and dedicate most oftentimes very limited resources, especially in care management, to go and chase a certain outcome for our attributed membership. Are we actually achieving the results that we intended to? Or was the juice worth the squeeze, so to speak, to really ensure that your operation is firing on all cylinders and we're not leaving any meat on the bone when it comes to the MSSP performance. One of the ways that we deploy with our clients, particularly in care management, is what we refer to as next generation risk stratification, which is really a suite of AI machine learning models that help predict risk, surface patient level risk factors, and actually going so far as recommending evidence-based next best actions, which really drive dramatic results when we compare engaged group versus a match control group. I won't read all of the results to you in the top right, but they are quite remarkable. And because we're doing a lot of the assessment clinically and non-clinically, i.e. those social determinants of health-based risk factors, we're able to save quite a bit of time per patient interaction, freeing up those, again, mostly limited care management resources to engage with more patients on their panels. We also recognize that most ACOs are limited in the panels overall that they can manage. So typically that might result in care managing aggressively, maybe the top 1 or 2 or 3, or maybe best case scenario, 5% of the highest risk patients. So the second pillar that we offer is something that we call deviceless remote patient monitoring, which is really a digital first approach toward care management that extends the human capacity that our clients have to digitally engage patients longitudinally in a manner that's highly accessible, basically using bidirectional texting and phone interactions to collect patient-reported data, triage that data, and alert clinical stakeholders if and only if the responses we're receiving indicate that that patient is likely to escalate in risk and result in an avoidable hospitalization, avoidable ED visit, all-cause readmission, etc. The result is we're able to, or the outcome of that is we're able to dramatically reduce cost of care across 35 or 36 different programs and use cases that we offer currently. And because we typically target those rising risk patients, maybe those that may not be high risk today or warrant human care management, the alert rate tends to be fairly reasonable, right? So the alert rate might only be 1.5% to 2%, whereas the alert rate for the high risk, high need patients will be orders of magnitude larger. Therefore, the average panel size per FTE who would be monitoring these alerts, on the low end, we've seen around 800 patients per FTE. On the high end extreme, we've seen a few clients achieve 1,500 patients per FTE. And typically that would be a medical assistant that's kind of manning the battleship, if you will, to work with those alerts and work through their standard operating procedures to escalate those accordingly, whether that's to nurse care managers, to care coordinators, to community health workers, to physicians, et cetera, depending on those alerts. With that, I'm going to toss the ball back to Megan to review several case studies around network optimization and benchmarking piece.
Yeah, thanks, Patrick. So before we get into the first case study, we just wanted to call out the fact that we do work with a wide range of ACOs, and the first thing that we typically see in their approach is that it depends heavily on data availability. So when organizations have limited performance or claims insight, they often default to a qualitative screening process to estimate risk and fit. Typically, qualitative indicators include where providers are located, what regions they serve, annual wellness visit rates, prior ACO participation, and existing provider relationships. And this approach is useful because ACO success is not just financial. Participation does need to align with the ACO's mission, clinical strategy, and especially technology readiness. For example, a primary care practice that still uses paper charts is unlikely to thrive in a model that depends on near real-time data integration. So qualitative review is important and necessary, but the limitation is that it doesn't reliably answer the financial question of what will this provider set do to performance. And that's where underwriting through our combined Wakely and Lightbeam offering really adds value, because it translates network composition into measurable financial impact And in the case studies that follow, we'll show how we help ACOs adjust their networks to improve performance, grounded in financial underwriting, not just intuition. So we'll start with the most complex scenario first, which is a national ACO convener. Typically, these are the most sophisticated organizations, often managing multiple ACOs across programs like ACO REACH and the Medicare Shared Savings Program, or MSSP. And they may often be dealing with multiple agreement start periods within MSSP as well. But this complexity does create some opportunity because if a convener has multiple ACO options and start periods, they can evaluate which providers belong in the most optimal ACO structure based on expected financial performance. And because some conveners may have both REACH and MSSP, they can avoid some structural constraints that do exist in MSSP, like needing to include an entire TIN. Within REACH, they have more flexible participation strategies. For example, they could exclude certain subsets of providers that are driving poor performance, such as certain specialty clusters. So in one national convener example, our underwriting was able to identify 2 underperforming health systems that did not fit well in any ACO configuration, regardless of the start period. Removing these systems resulted in multi-million-dollar improvements because each was contributing roughly 15,000 to 25,000 members. So when you avoid leaking even a few $100s per member per year from an underperforming segment, that impact can quickly compound to tens of millions in incremental value for an ACO. And that's why we encourage conveners to evaluate their TIN and participating provider configurations every year, because if we find an issue, that return will be immediate, often even a double-digit ROI. And if we don't find anything, it's still valuable because it's confirmation that the network is already optimized and positioned for success. And the next case study we'll talk about is a multi-specialty ACO. And this is where underwriting can be even more challenging just because specialists often see a sicker population. And for many ACOs, including specialists, can make it harder to generate savings. But that doesn't necessarily mean to exclude specialists universally, because not all specialists are equal. Some may bring strategic value beyond financial performance, such as operational or reporting benefits. So the key here is just to evaluate specialist impact intentionally to determine who to include. A practical constraint with this is TIN structure. So in some organizations, primary care and specialty physicians are all under one TIN, making that separation difficult. But when some PCPs and specialists are separated across multiple TINs, that creates an optimization lever, and you can include the PCP TINs and excluding certain specialty TINs that are driving adverse performance. So in this case study, we removed 5 specialty TINs and improved expected performance by approximately $5 million. And the takeaway here is that network design, especially TIN configuration, is a powerful lever, and underwriting can help pinpoint where the leverage actually is. Then the next case study we'll talk about is a convener-led ACO. So this group needed fast, credible guidance on who to recruit. Their targets didn't have to just be the highest performers. They were just looking for ones that were likely to generate positive expected savings and not be detrimental to the aggregate ACO performance. So we supported their growth team by identifying specific TINs and MPIs for expansion. These providers were either already participating elsewhere or even new to ACO participation but had favorable profiles. And that gave their team the evidence-backed story they needed to approach the market and recruit with confidence. And this is a core Wakely and Lightbeam use case because equipping growth teams with timely, actionable intelligence, especially as recruiting ramps up. Many conveners will be starting this in January for performance year 2027. So it's an important thing to keep in mind as you're starting into the next performance year with your network. And then on the next case study, we'll talk through a PCP-led group. For groups that are new to risk and evaluating conveners to join, they have an opportunity where underwriting can actually become negotiating leverage. And we can quantify the financial contribution of their group's participating TINs and MPIs, which reveals the true performance position versus generic convener assumptions. This matters because conveners may default to broad stroke terms, such as applying an average benchmark year trend without fully crediting a group's regional efficiency or specific performance dynamics. And when a PCP-led organization can say that they actually understand the mechanics of MSSP and that they know what their provider set contributes, they're able to negotiate better terms, clearer expectations, and an amount of downside risk that matches their true position. It also helps frame a key trade-off that conveners propose, which may be that they'll cover the downside but take half of the upside. And that may be appropriate for a group that is break even, but if underwriting shows that the group is already positioned favorably, taking on some risk might be worth it to retain more shared savings. And these are the types of conversations that we've supported with PCP-led organizations, especially when entering risk for the first time. So in this case study, we supported a PCP-led group evaluating multiple convener opportunities and achieved $3 million in incremental savings compared to a standalone model. The takeaway here is just comparing multiple models and conveners allows a group to identify the most advantageous structure, and this positions a group to have negotiating leverage and receive a portion of the savings that is more indicative of their performance. And with that, we'll wrap it up with some takeaways from the presentation. So first is the strategic participation decisions of who's in and who's out can materially shift ACO performance. Even a few underperforming TINs can create multi-million-dollar leakage, and removing or restructuring can immediately change results. An annual network refresh is essential. Provider performance, risk scores, local markets are all changing every year. So this is something that we really emphasize, that every single year you should be re-looking at your network and making sure that you are looking at those changes and making the best decision for the next year. And then data-driven network management does consistently produce solid performance across a diverse group of clients. As I mentioned before, qualitative insight is helpful, but quantitative underwriting is really what drives confident decisions. Combining claims data, risk adjustment, cost patterns, and benchmark dynamics shows exactly where this performance is going to be coming from, and it can help support more defensive strategies such as avoiding downside, or offensive strategies such as capturing savings. And this data-driven process gives leadership a clear defensible rationale for network actions, especially when communicating this with boards or provider partners. Having this data to back up decisions is very important. And lastly, curation, optimization, and model alignment are central to MSSP success. And groups that structure themselves to optimize regional efficiency and risk mix are rewarded. Specialist-heavy groups, national ACO conveners, and PCP-led groups each may have different optimization approaches, but they can all leverage network optimization tools to help support their goals. And so really the takeaway here is networks don't accidentally become high-performing. They get there through intentional design, underwriting, and strategy. And with that, we can switch over to our Q&A portion of the presentation.
All right. Well, we do have some questions that came in from the audience. So if you do have a question for any of our speakers today, either the Wakely team or the Lightbeam team, or just in general, go ahead and drop it now into your control module. There's a place for questions specifically. We're going to get to as many as we can. So let's dive in here in no particular order. The first one is for the Wakely team. Are there common areas that are overlooked by MSSPs when forecasting performance?
Yeah, I can start with that one, and Megan, maybe you can hop in with some results. I think the regional efficiency piece was a center piece of our presentation because I think that is overlooked. Getting yourself a head start in the program is really critical, especially in environments like we're in 2025 with increased utilization, ACPT headwinds. All indications are that might continue into 2026. So I think making sure you have the right head start to be successful in the program is really critical. I think the other piece, just a quick aside, I worked for a large MSO for about 3 years, helping run their underwriting department, and we had 10 plus ACOs, hundreds of thousands of lives. It got very complex. I think one of the things that we honestly overlooked was understanding the operational components of our partners, right? We worked with several health systems. One of the years, in a retrospective ACO, there was an oncology group who started billing through the TIN. Obviously, that produces some problems with attribution and costs coming through the ACO. So I think it's really critical to marry. We talked a lot about the quantitative pieces on this call, but marrying those quantitative analyses with the operational components, truly understanding who these practices are, making sure you're partnered hand in hand with them. Everyone is bought into the approach. They understand what being in an ACO really means, and they are bought into the ACO's care planning and coding and everything like that. So I think in terms of what is overlooked, I think some of the benchmark math is really critical, but also those operational pieces sometimes are needing to be serviced as well to make sure you have sustained success.
Yeah, I agree. Those are all really great points. And one thing, like within, Pete touched on this before, but let's say that like you have a group that's meeting your regional adjustment cap. You can add groups that might not have that high of a regional efficiency, but you're still going to be lifted up together. So it's more important to look at the group with the TIN and without the TIN rather than that individual TIN performance. You want to see how they look in aggregate with your group. And a lot of time groups will specifically look at one TIN on their own, but it's oftentimes better to look at them with your whole ACO and without your ACO, and that will just be a better way to look at those results.
Awesome. All right. Next question is this. How long does a consulting engagement with Wakely Services typically take?
Yeah, that's a great question. It really depends on the scope. So I'd say if we're talking about network optimization and looking at a set of TINs for a particular performance year, that could be a week or 2 weeks to develop that type of analysis. But if we're talking about continual updates to that as new data comes in, working on forecasting intra-year, if that scope expands, it could be months or even an evergreen relationship. So it really just depends on the scope that is needed for each client.
All right. Moving along. Next question is, will Lightbeam integrate its solutions with Wakely Services, analytics and services for its clients?
Yeah, absolutely. So part of that is a technical integration that's well underway, certainly ready as ACOs move out of the kind of fog of war of performance year 2025 and quality reporting and risk adjustment chasing that's happening as we speak, I'm sure, to really support the performance year 2026 and beyond endeavors. But again, I think one of the unique solutions that we bring to market as partners are our technology plus services approach, where we have experts that sit behind the data, behind the databases to really, again, work arm in arm with our clients to better drive these solutions as they're adopted, as well as to drive performance throughout the performance years.
All right. Next question is, does Lightbeam and Wakely offer its analytics solutions and services on a contingency basis predicated on value delivered?
Speaking for Lightbeam, we're willing to entertain those kinds of conversations for sure. I think the devil is always in the details. We really want to dig in and understand with all of our clients what their unique circumstances are, and then ensure that we have the appropriate level of commitments from all of the partners in the relationship to ensure that we're all rowing in the same direction. But short answer is yes, we're definitely willing to entertain those conversations.
Great. Next question. What data sources used in your regional are used in your regional efficiency calculations. CMS published regional data is typically stale. How do you solve this problem?
Yeah, so we typically tap into the VRDC database, the 100% Medicare database, to build specific benchmarks for each of the groups within the ACO that you're trying to project. Yeah, data staleness is something that exists, right, within the VRDC. I think right now we have through Q2 of 2025. So I think it's getting better in terms of data recency, but you're always going to be a little bit behind. One of the challenges I had in my old seat is when you're looking to load, in July, August of the next year for 2027, you may be 2 years behind on risk scores and expenditures to project a certain TIN. So I think intra-year, if you have intra-year results, if you're in a program now, you have CCLF data, you have packages that tell you where the ACO is at, that can be leveraged as well to help supplement, to fill in some of that missing data that exists due to that lag. But certainly data recency is a topic of conversation and something that we're continually looking at to try to get more recent.
All right. Next question. Have you employed specific strategies for hospital-based or high-revenue ACOs where all the practices bill under a single TIN?
Yeah, and so that kind of goes back to the example I gave where, a hospital system might have a single TIN, PCPs and specialists might bill through that TIN. We have come up with solutions if the health system is willing to create new TINs or reshuffle with existing TINs. It can create some efficiencies by doing that. It's not always a bad thing to have specialists in the TIN. It just really depends on the benchmark dynamics. But there are certain groups that might not be a fit for a risk arrangement given the TIN structure, and so we're willing to work to figure out, okay, how can you restructure this group to be successful in an ACO and have limited operational burden that exists with the creation of new TINs and the reshuffling of providers and the billing. So it's that trade-off, right? It's the operational lift trade-off versus the ACO success, and we have many of those conversations and work with clients to help them figure out those issues.
And Pete, I might piggyback on that. While looking at the TIN level, perhaps it might be a little blurry at the NPI level or location or clinic level, assuming they all roll up to a single TIN. I think that's where the operational and management platform really comes into play. So, speaking for Lightbeam, really enabling and empowering our clients to break down performance at the sub-TIN level, whether that's by individual NPI, whether those are custom groups of NPIs across a whole range of metrics transposed against regional benchmark, those kinds of data.
All right. Well, that concludes our audience questions for today. And as we close out, first of all, I wanted to thank you all for a fantastic presentation. Pete, Patrick, Megan, this was very thorough. There was a lot that we discussed today. And just so you all know out there, we have recorded this conversation. And so you will receive an email that when we conclude, that will have a link to the recording as well as to the slides, because there was a lot of information there, of course, that you'll want to pull down later, and you can do that there. But as we close out, I wanted to encourage you all to head over to vbcexhibithall.com and check out the virtual exhibit booth for Lightbeam. There's a lot of great resources here. You can read up on them and what they're doing in the space, and of course, reach out to them through there and just educate yourself on their services and solutions. There's a lot of great resources there as well in the virtual library that we have. There's a lot of articles by Lightbeam and webinars by them, in addition to others on a lot of different topics. And so hope that you can find that as a very valuable resource. And then finally, if you wanted to reach out directly to the Lightbeam team, feel free to do so. You can see there's a QR code here, or their email is there as well, or go to their website, or feel free to reach out to me. I'm happy to facilitate an introduction to any of our speakers if that would be helpful for you. But I wanted to thank you all again so much for joining us today. I know there's a lot vying for your attention during this season, and so really appreciate you spending your afternoons with us. Hope you all join us on the next one. And until then, enjoy a very happy rest of the holiday season here and the rest of the year. So thank you all so much. We'll see you on the next one. Bye-bye.